Thank you. With a very serious and heavy discussion this morning, so I just start up with a little bit of a joke, as we used to in the synagogue every time before I speak, try sometimes. So one of the ideas that we're talking about is restoring faith, the strength of a family, the strength of relationships. So here goes, there's a couple that unfortunately is not getting along. We shouldn't know from these things, but it happens. So the husband needs to go early in the morning. He has a flight. He has to get up very early in the morning. What happens to be that even if he sets his alarm clock, he's the type that will sleep through the alarm clock. Happens to be he had a very strong argument with his wife, and he doesn't feel comfortable even to turn to her and say, please wake me up in the morning, because she gets up early. So she's sleeping. He puts a note next to her. My dear wife, 5 o'clock in the morning, please wake me up. When he wakes up and he opens his eyes, it's 10 o'clock. Missed his plane. He's getting all upset, and then he sees there's a note right next to his bed. And the note says, my dear husband, it's 5 a.m., time to get up. We just came from, in the Jewish cycle, we start the reading of the 5 books of Moses, known as the Bible. We started last week, known from the beginning, from Genesis, Bereshit. This coming week, we're going to be reading Noah. So it's the first 11 chapters of the beginning. And it's interesting, and I'll do it very quickly here, that we read about there's 4 interesting stories: the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Cain and Abel, the story of Noah, and then the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. Now here's very interesting, and this addresses to what we're talking about to all of us. The first problem is taking personal responsibility. We all know what happens in the beginning. God asks Adam, why did you eat from the forbidden apple? And he says, well, it's Chava, the woman that you gave to me. She's the one that convinced me. He turns to her, why did you do that? Well, the serpent convinced me. This is running away from personal responsibility. Then we come to Cain and Hevel, the 2 brothers. Over there, it's beyond that. It's already the moral responsibility. Cain maybe admit that maybe he has done it, but am I my brother's keeper? Running away from moral responsibility. We come to Noah. Noah is very interesting. He is righteous, but by the end of the game is he saved himself, his wife, his kids, and some of the animals. But it's missing a little bit the collective responsibility where to go out and care about everyone. And finally we come to the Tower of Babel. Here's very interesting. What do they want? To build something so we could reach God. This is where the foundation is, there's friendship and everything, but the main point is missing is to realize the Creator and that kind of a responsibility to who we are. So this is a step-by-step situation, the personal responsibility, the moral responsibility, collective responsibility, but on top of all that is the response that we have to Almighty, to God Himself. I would like to introduce our panelists over here, and I will call up here Dennis Prager, and you have in your papers the whole information here. So first, I'll tell you nationally syndicated radio host with more than 400 stations around the country. He's the co-founder of Prager University, the most viewed conservative video in the world, with 1 billion views a year. More than half of the people are the age of 35. He has he's the New York Times bestselling author of 9 books, and just lately had a new book that just came out, The Rational Bible. Prager did his graduate work of Russian and Middle East Institute in Columbia University School, and he taught Russian and Jewish history in Brooklyn College. Dennis is deeply passionate about preserving America the West and the Kirche Valley system. So, Dennis, and I would also say as a rabbi of Chabad that
Thank you. So I thought Ryan was speaking first.
yeah, well, I'm going to call him up.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, you just
I'll speak in a moment. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
I'm going to call up Ryan Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Center and the author of 5 books on human behavior, ecology, and philosophy, including the just released Tearing Us Apart, and he's a fellow of the Institute of Human Ecology and University and founding editor of the Public Discourse. He received the Bachelor of Arts degree from Princeton University and received his doctoral degree in political philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. So Ryan, welcome. And we're going to start with Ryan saying a few words.
Okay, is this working? Can you hear me? Yep, all right, perfect. I just want to start by thanking the organizers for this. Flying up here this morning, I had no idea what to expect, and it's been just a wonderful series of morning presentations, and it's just so wonderful to see so many people here. Who knew in Vermont, of all places, there were this many people who were right thinking. So what they've asked me to do is just to kind of kick things off for this lunchtime conversation is to speak just for a few minutes about essentials for human flourishing. The Institute's dedicated to human flourishing. How could we think about those essentials? And I thought the way to kind of organize and categorize what I want to say this afternoon is to say something that would be common to everyone in attendance today. Right? This is a gathering. We have Orthodox Jews, we have Roman Catholics, we have Protestants of different traditions. So we have both Jews and Christians, we have both Reformed and Catholic, and yet there's something that we all agree about. There are certain truths that you could think of this, if you're Catholic, as natural law truths. If you're Reformed, you can think of these creational ordinances. Jewish, you can think of this as the Noahide covenant. Things that were built into the created order that are common to all of our theological traditions, and at one point was common to the American political tradition. Truths that no one really dissented from, because they were self-evident truths. They were common sense. They were things that every one of our grandparents knew and believed. They didn't even have to believe it because it was just so obviously true. It didn't require any faith. It didn't require any belief. It's like saying you believe the sky is blue or that water is wet. You don't need belief for that. But now, today, these are the sorts of truth claims that will get you canceled. If you go to a college campus to give a lecture on these topics, this is where Matt Walsh gets shouted down for asking the question, what is a woman? This is where Amazon will cancel your books. This is where you're likely to lose family relationships and friendships if you take a stand on these issues. And to my mind, these are things that are non-negotiable. These are self-evident. They need to be defended. And so I've kept you in waiting. What are these truths that I want to mention? 4 truths, knowable by reason, so they're accessible to the human intellect. God's created us so that we would know his created reality. But they're so important that God revealed them to us. And God revealed them to us on the very first page of the Bible. And so those 4 truths that we're made in the image and likeness of God, that we're created male and female, that men and women are created for each other in marriage, and that all of us are created for relationship with God. Those 4 things were utterly unobjectionable to all of the American founders. There are 4 truths that were unobjectionable a generation or two ago. And yet today, if you were to defend those things, that's where you would see so many of the divisions. That's where you see the polarization, the worst it's been in America in recent memory. And I wanted to say a word about why those four things matter, how they apply to today's debates, and how they undergird human flourishing, why we won't be able to flourish either as individuals or as families or as faith communities or as a nation if we don't get these four things right. So let me start with the fact that we're made in the image and likeness of God. I mean, this is the fundamental foundation for human dignity, for human rights. This is the foundation for why we can say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. That's not actually a self-evident truth for much of human history throughout much of the globe. It's only those people who had been touched by the Hebrew and then the Christian scriptures that came to believe in human equality because of the Imago Dei. What's at stake right now when we talk about human dignity, the Imago Dei, this is what undergirds the abortion debate. Those who deny this truth, this is what we've been now 49 and a half years fighting over with respect to Roe v. Wade, a case that the Supreme Court didn't just get wrong. They've gotten lots of court cases wrong, but in getting it wrong, they perpetuated a fundamental injustice, a fundamental human rights violation for almost 50 years now. This truth is what's at stake in all of our debates over CRT and whether or not we're all created equal, or is there a racial hierarchy, and will schools be imposing this onto students. This truth is what's at stake during so many of the early debates over COVID in terms of who was going to be treated first and who was going to be treated last. One of the things that Roger, when he was at HHS, was really outspoken on was making sure that we weren't discriminating based on disability, based on people with disabilities being placed at the back of the line for treatments, people who were elderly being placed at the back of the line. There were fears, and some states actually issued guidelines that wouldn't have respected this truth that we're all made in God's image, therefore we all matter, therefore we all have equal intrinsic dignity. Second truth, we're created male or female. Before I get to the most obvious way in which we're getting this wrong and how it's not allowing for human flourishing, much of today's debates over transgender ideology, you can trace a more approximate route to second wave feminism. And so one of the things that we had in the United States was we thought that equality would require sameness, and that if we wanted to say men and women are equal, we would actually have to embrace an androgynous form of feminism. And so for 2 generations now, we've had a bad theory of feminism on offer, in which for women to be equal to men, they have to live as if they're men. And now 2 generations after that, we have a cohort of young women, a 4,400% increase in the young women who are rejecting their own embodiment as female. That's where you're seeing the explosion in teenage and 20-something gender dysphoria and non-binary identities and gender ambidextrous identities. And these young women are being told that puberty-blocking drugs, cross-sex hormones, and in some cases double mastectomies are their pathway to happiness. Right? We're denying a fundamental truth about human nature. It's not leading to happiness, wholeness. It's not leading to flourishing. It's actually undermining that. And this is going on everywhere across the United States. There's no way, no place you could go to hide from this. And there's a truth claim at stake, whether or not we're created male and female, or is sex merely assigned at birth, is gender a spectrum, and is gender fluid. Third truth, men and women are created for each other in marriage. And both of those parts matter. I mean, obviously it was 7 years ago that the Supreme Court redefined marriage for the entire country, right? Got another Supreme Court case wrong, and in doing so, perpetrated an injustice on the country. Why? Precisely because something that I heard Pope Francis say back in 2014, I was in the audience when he said this, children have a right to a mother and a father. Right? That's why we have marriage. That's why God created marriage. It's why he embodied us, male or female, so that we could unite as one flesh in a permanent monogamous exclusive union called marriage, to then give birth to the next generation and then to rear the next generation. So the male-female part matters, but the marriage part matters. Marriage is the best institution for human flourishing at a purely natural level. Right? We'll talk about the church and synagogue at the supernatural level. But if you want to predict what a likely outcome is for a child in terms of employment, graduation, income, whether or not they'll be incarcerated, look at the family of origin. I remember hearing Michael Novak say the best department of health, education, and welfare is the family. It's not the government program, it's not the welfare state, it's not the police state. Getting men and women to commit to each other permanently and exclusively as husband and wife, to then be mother and father to their children, is what we need in a civil society that's going to flourish. It's the best limit on the growth of the state. It's the best way to produce what the state needs but can't do itself, produce the next generation of citizens. And so we need strong families, where we've seen in the past 50 years since the sexual revolution, marriage rates decline, cohabitation rates going up, non-marital childbearing going up, divorce going up. That's where you then see a trail of failures to flourish. That's where you see the broken hearts, the broken homes. Those of us who were blessed to be born into families where mom and dad stuck together, that's where you see a whole trail of blessings follow in the wake. So that third truth, that men and women are created for each other in marriage, both of those parts matter. And then finally, fourth truth that I want to mention, all of us are created for friendship with God. That we're a religious nature to human nature. And this really matters to my mind. It comes in two forms today. We now have, for the first time in American history, a culture that is explicitly anti-religious. It'll put religious freedom in scare quotes, so-called religious freedom. It'll redefine religious freedom as freedom to worship, right? It'll denigrate religious liberty. But why? Because it denigrates religion itself. Right? And I'll get to the religious liberty stuff in a minute, but the first thing is to say, how can a republic that's founded on self-evident truths, that we're all created equal and endowed by a creator with certain inherent rights, how can that republic last if we deny that there is a creator, and that creator is the one who endows us with our dignity and with our liberties? Right? It's hard to sustain a self-governing republic when you cut it off from its roots. Right? How can you have human rights without the author of human life? How can you have the natural law without the natural law giver? Right? This is what many, I would say, post-Christian European nations are now discovering. It's very hard. This is where Ralph Southwood said, if you don't like the religious right, wait till you see the post-religious right. It's not going to be pretty. So one is that we no longer have a public embrace of religion in the public square. My old boss, Richard John Newhouse, referred to this as the naked public square. We've denuded civil society from religious voices, from religious influences, from religious values that ultimately undergird the American experiment in ordered liberty. Part two, we then see all the religious liberty violations. And the pastor who spoke in the panel just before lunch, the religious liberty violations for houses of worship and other religious institutions that were shut down during the pandemic while the liquor stores and the casinos were allowed to stay open. It shows what is your highest good. The religious liberty violations in terms of the adoption agencies, the schools, the bakers, florists, photographers, go through the list, people who reject to either the redefinition of marriage or the transitioning of minors. Right? When you get these first three truths wrong about human nature, in our embodiment, in our dignity, and in the very nature of marriage, you're then going to get the religious liberty violations. And that's going to be a failure to flourish, because if we can't have the freedom to worship God, to honor God, to live out our faith not just on a Saturday or on a Sunday, but 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, we're not going to be able to flourish, because that's ultimately where final human happiness lies. Right? It's in a permanent, eternal friendship with God, which is why religious liberty is the first liberty. It's why it's so important. It precisely creates that space for all of us to respond to God's invitation as we understand it, not as Caesar understands it. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop. I believe Dennis is going to be interrogating me, or it's going to be a conversation. I'm not sure what he has planned here, but thank you.
Frankly, I'm totally happy to hear Ryan the entire time. It is so rare, even at conferences of kindred spirits, that I agree with every word, not just every sentence that was said, that I just thought, I feel a drop superfluous, but you did invite me, and LA is very far from Burlington, just for the record. what they told me is, you'll speak, I'll speak, and then we dialogue and then take questions. So that's the way. But since we'll probably both go over our 5 minute, maybe we can even go to questions. I know you're as happy about that. So let the sponsors decide after I speak for the next hour. So so I'm going to be the bearer of bad news because I'm incapable of phony optimism. So let me begin with everything is a religious question, exactly as you put it. The rejection of the Bible as the basic text of America will lead to the downfall of the country. And there's a secular reason. There's not just a religious reason. The secular reason is, where do you get your wisdom if not from the Bible? I've asked this on my radio show. I have a great advantage over almost anyone who writes or speaks on the big issues. I have a human laboratory every single day for 3 hours. I do not speak about politics a lot of the time. And what I have done for 40 years is ask listeners questions, and then dialogue, debate, just listen, and of course I offer a lot of my own thinking. But I have had this human laboratory. You are now listening to, I figured this out. I really believe this. I have spoken with, not to, with more people than any living human being. That's really remarkable. And there's no doubt in my mind it's true. 40 years talk radio, hours a day, and you're talking to people, not just to people, but with people. That's a lot of people for 40 years. I've learned a lot. Learned a lot. And that has been, as I say, my human laboratory. So you began, Ryan, with the beauty of the Catholic, Protestant, and Jew who are here today, and in fundamental agreement that is the basis of my belief. We share the great majority of the Bible as our Bible. That is huge. That you can't get bigger than that. But I would like to share with you the bad news, and that is, number one, to my great sadness, religion failed overwhelmingly in the last 2 years. The shutdown of most churches and synagogues said to me that most religious people are not religious. That is my belief. It's not, I never say anything for effect. Most people, religion is a celestial butler. There is someone in heaven who will answer their prayer, hopefully, and that is the extent of their religion. But they fear the New York Times and they fear their governor more than they fear God. And that means they're not religious. If you don't fear God, your religion is worthless. It's as simple as that. And watching all these churches and synagogues obey irrational, secular authority, just as the schools did and every left-wing organization, means they're worthless. Sorry. The nicest rabbis, nicest priests, and they are nice. Nice is worthless, but they are nice. I'm sorry. If we don't acknowledge this, even the people, and I don't know how many are here, I am a big Mormon fan. Obviously, it's not my theology. We don't share theology in this room. We share values, which is to me infinitely more important than theology. The Mormons failed just as much as the Protestants, the Catholics, and the Jews. Everyone failed, with the exception of a handful of ultra-Orthodox synagogues, evangelical churches, and I don't know what number of Catholic churches, but it's very small. And every Mormon church was shut because they have one authority in the Mormon church, and they told them to shut down. So when we push religion as the sine qua non of a resurgent America, we have nothing to show for it. We were as empty and scared as every secular person in this country. I don't know if we'll recover. I don't know. We can, but I don't know if we will. It is impossible to overstate the failure of these priests, rabbis, and ministers. And then shutting down their religious schools as well. In Sweden, secular Sweden was more God-fearing than a religious America. Secular Sweden said kids have to go to school, and they all did, every single day of COVID. Every single Swedish kid went to school who was under 16 years of age. Not one died. It was the great grand lie of our time that this is a danger to children. And the religious accepted the lie. I'm angry, in case you can't tell. That's why I sleep well. I get it out during the day, and I am a baby at night. My wife is here. She can attest to that fact. But I'm angry. The last best hope for America is religion, and it failed when it was tested. I'll go worse. I wrote in the middle of the lockdown. I never say the middle of the pandemic. The pandemic was irrelevant. The lockdown was everything. In the middle of the lockdown, I write a column every week. There are literally 1,000 of my columns on the internet. And I wrote one week. I wrote what was called The Good German. I have rethought, as a Jew who was a member of the U.S. Holocaust Museum Board and written a major book on anti-Semitism, I've rethought my view of Germans in the course of the last 2 years. And then I wrote my next column called The Good American. And this was my thesis. It's very easy to, people, they dump on the German, the good, that's a phrase, the good German, right? The good German, the one who he didn't hurt any Jews, but he did nothing. The good German is the normal human being. It's not German. There's nothing German about the good German. You have to understand, I've rethought a lot as a thinker and as a Jew in these last few years. I no longer use this phrase, the good German, because I don't know what people wouldn't be overwhelmingly the good. And yes, the good American went along, and there was no Gestapo to send him to Dachau. The German had a much greater reason to fear speaking out. The American had no greater reason to fear. You'll be crapped on Facebook was enough to keep most Americans quiet. That's bad, folks. That is a bad sign for our society. We are morally weak. And that's it. There are millions who are not morally weak. That's true. But there are not just millions, there are 330 million Americans. They feared the Gestapo, and we feared Facebook. And we shut up. It's okay with you that your kids don't go to school? By the way, that's a blessing if they don't go to school. That's the irony. That's the irony of ironies. The schools are moral and intellectual wastelands. They can't, not just that they can't spell "it's" correctly. They can't. Do you understand that? I believe that the average high school senior does not know the difference between IT''S and ITS. I would bet on it. I would bet serious money, and I'm not a gambler. I have other vices. Gambling's not one of them. There's no doubt in my mind they don't know the difference between "it's." They don't even know what an apostrophe is. I'd love to ask kids at Yale, what's an apostrophe? Oh, my favorite is ask them what's Leviticus. And if you'd say, Leviticus is running into Preakness, I think you should bet on them. They'd go, okay. This is the state we're in now. Mainstream Protestantism, Catholicism, up to the Pope. I'm sorry, but I speak to Catholics all the time. I feel terrible for Catholics. Protestants and Jews don't have the same problem. We don't have a Pope. We don't have a vicar of Christ on earth. Catholics do. My heart breaks for them. To feel that your Pope is largely a moral failure, is just another woke person. The great threat to the humanity, according to him, is global warming. Not as his predecessor believed, secularism. That's the great threat to humanity. Secularism. Because as what's his name in the late 19th century, the British thinker, Chesterton, it's not even, we don't even know if he actually said it, but I didn't say it. So I need you to know that. I wish I did. When people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. They believe in anything. So I'll end with this, because I have a full-blown talk later. And that is, the left keeps me religious. I know you have every right to laugh. However, I promise you before God Almighty that it's literally true. More than any religious people, the left keeps me religious. My route to God is not the typical one. My route to God, and I'm a deep believer in God, I just finished my 3rd volume of a 5-volume commentary on the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. My route to God is through the back door. God never appeared to me. I can't admit to any particularly intimate relationship with God. I am God obsessed, but I can't say that. Well, I wrote an essay. I'm very open. I wrote an essay years ago that the hardest of the laws of the Torah, that's where all the laws are in the Bible and the Torah, 613 of them. The hardest one for me is to love God with all my heart and soul. That's why it's a law, because it doesn't come naturally. God knows it doesn't come naturally. There's no law to love your children. That comes naturally. There's a law to love the stranger. That doesn't come naturally, and nor does that. So what is my route to God? Reason and observing how those who reject God behave. If the left, which hates religion, because they have lived the serpent's dream, you will be like God. That's what people want to be. They want to determine good and evil. That's what the serpent promised he'll do. You eat from the tree, you will know good and evil, which means you will determine good and evil, just like God. People want to be God. I don't. So if the people who want to be God produced good people, I went to Columbia. It was a cesspool when I was there. Today it is worse than a cesspool. It was just noted to be the worst university in the country in terms of free speech, which is an achievement. That to be the worst university in terms of free speech, it's incredible when you think about it. And I saw the moral wasteland of the university I attended, and that is where I have an essay. It's on the internet, How I Found God at Columbia. The left keeps me religious. If they were good, if they were rational, just forget good, just rational, it would be a challenge to my religiosity. That the people who most hate the Judeo-Christian value system are the worst people in the country says to me there must be something great about the Judeo-Christian value system. That's where I am. Your mic's not on.
Oh,
Okay.
I think it is, yep, okay. The Essentials for Human Flourishing from Ryan Anderson, and also really the collapse of religion and our adherence to it by Dennis Prager. And I feel your pain and I feel your anger. I felt and thought the same things over this past time, and I know many of us have. We only have a brief 5 minutes for questions from the audience because Ryan needs to run to catch a plane. I don't want to delay him. So, are there any members of the audience who would like to ask a question? This is the time to do it. We have one now.
Is this on? Very good. Gentlemen, Mr. Prager, I listened to you speaking with Mr. Rubin recently and talking about having dinner with Jordan Peterson, something I would love to do myself. But much as I respect your anger, and I know that your fear is of God, not of man, in that discussion with Mr. Rubin, you suggested a door, and I'm not sure I clearly understood it all, but that the left's, and I guess the irreligious. Generally, they're suffering from a lack of belief, and that our power, our ability to reach them, is rooted somehow in our having values based on belief. And you expounded that somehow our example could possibly be a light to them and to reach them and to open dialogue with them and to fight back against the hindrance of free speech. I'm butchering it, but I wanted to ask you to expound on that a little.
So I didn't quite follow. To expound on what? How to reach out to the left?
Well, you were discussing it as though the left's lack of belief is almost a weakness that invites us to open dialogue with them.
Oh, I think the left-right divide is unbridgeable. I want to defeat them. I don't have much, I'm happy to dialogue with them. I went on the Young Turks, which is left of Lenin, and I will go on any leftist who invites me anywhere, I will appear. But I believe dialogue with them is useless because they're not liberals. Dialogue with liberals are the problem in America. There are very few leftists. They run everything, but there are few of them. They win because liberals who share no values with the left vote for them. If liberals voted their values, no Democrat would be elected in this country. It's the liberal who is the tragedy. The left is the enemy. The liberal is the tragedy.
Thank you.
I know it because they're in my family. I'm a Jew from New York. How could it not be? In New York, sex is not fixed at birth. Party is.
Okay, our next question.
I have been told repeatedly that I should not call people out for being cowards or calling out cowardice. But that is one of the things that I see as being the biggest problem, is people are just unwilling to stand for their values. And just as a candidate for office, I'm not supposed to insult people, but like, how else do you call people to task? How else do you bring to people's attention other than shaking them out of that? Like, do you understand you're being a coward? As you said, all we have to do is be insulted on Facebook. We're not taking bullets on the shores of Normandy. What do you suggest for waking those who are too afraid to speak up for themselves?
Sure. Who told you you're not supposed to call people cowards? I mean, like, I think there's a time and a place for everything, more or less. And so, I probably wouldn't, publicly call someone a coward, but I think, taking a family member, a friend, a colleague at work aside and saying, I overheard that conversation and so, why didn't you confront? Because one of two things could be possible. It could be, oh, well, I'm having dinner with him tonight, and that's what I'm going to confront, right? So you might not know the whole story, but the other might be, yeah, you're right. I just, I gave in to fear. And so I think it's perfectly good for us. It needs to be done in a charitable spirit, I think. If it's a family member, a friend, a coworker, if you see them, a failure to rise to the occasion, take them aside privately and say, you should have had a stiffer backbone. Because they might need that kick in the butt to do it better next time. Like, I don't think it's a problem to call people out for cowardice. We need more courage, and courage is contagious, right? So the more you exercise it, the more other people do it. You can lead by example as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's time.
Oh.
It is your time. However, we could take one more question for Mr. Prager, but Mr. Anderson, it is
Ryan,
a
it's
pleasure
great to be
having had you.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making the trip. All right. We will take one more question right now for Mr. Prager.
By the way, I don't know what your time frame is. I'm here. So
Yeah.
if you want to use me more, fine. If you have another thing to go to, that's fine. I'm offering myself.
Wonderful. And you are going to be on again. So
Right, I know.
You're not off the hook.
Right, fair enough.
And anybody can grab him in the meantime is what he's kind of saying.
By the way, so let me then comment on that question. I fully admit, in my deep belief in being transparent, it would not be easy for me to say to any of my relatives, you're a coward, you're a coward. Nor do I think it would be effective. So my macro and my micro are not the same. I will say cowardice is dominant in liberalism, but I won't say to someone I love in my family, and thank God it's not my kids or my wife, which is really by far the most important. I can handle, if other family members. It's sad to me, but look, life has sadness. I can live with it. But I'll give an example of how rampant it is. So the University of Pennsylvania, another cesspool. I would much rather, if my choice for my child go to the University of Pennsylvania, which is an Ivy League school, or not go to college, I would prefer that they not go to college. The University of Pennsylvania is awful. The University of Pennsylvania, it's a competition between Yale and Columbia and Penn. It's a very tough race to the bottom. Princeton now. No, you have to know this. You have to know this. It's very sad, but mature people recognize sadness. Anyway, the University of Pennsylvania women's swim team had a male member, Leah Thomas, and a man who said, after swimming in the men's team for 2 years, no, actually, I'm a female. And of course, Penn forced her onto the team and broke all the records and knocked out all the girls, beat them consistently. And some of the girls cried, but none of them said a word. And why? Because Penn basically said, you're kicked off the team, and you might be kicked out of college, and they knew that their chances of a graduate school would be minimized. Okay? So, if it was my daughter, I would say, screw graduate school. Your character is infinitely more important than goddamn graduate school. That's what I would say. And by the way, I did say it to my sons. I have 2 sons. And I said from the day they could understand English, your character is infinitely more important to me than your grades.
Amen.
And if every parent said that, we wouldn't be in the crisis we are in today.
Correct.
Parents live to have their kid attend a prestigious school. That means they're a good parent. That is the defining element for the middle class, upper class parent in the United States. As a Jew, I tell the joke that as my wife who's here, she knows that I'm stopped in restaurants and at airports. And by the way, I love it. I think it's beautiful. I am in more selfies than most human beings, and it's fine. But so my joke is, how do I know if the person stopped me is a Jew or a non-Jew? Because there's no way to tell. But there is one giveaway. If they tell me what college their kid goes to, it's a Jew. As I have said, no Gentile in history has ever told a stranger what college his kid goes to. If you ask a Jew, how are you? Oh, my daughter's at Dartmouth. That is how he is. His existential health is, my daughter is at Dartmouth. That defines them. But it's not just Jews. It's not. I wish it were just Jews. This is. We live. There were rabbis here, so I will say it. Of course, I'll translate. But there's more avodah zarah today than when Abraham lived. When Abraham lived, there was idol worship, but it was basically there was a couple of idols. They worshipped him, and that was it. We have more idols than they had in Abraham's time, and this is the crisis again. What rabbi, priest, and minister is making these announcements? That college is avodah zarah. College is idol worship. Say it. Say it. If you don't say it, you have failed your mission as a clergyman. You are there to keep your job, not to make your people religious. And by the way, most rabbis, priests, and ministers are there to keep their job. And by the way, I love a lot of them. I have a big affection for clergy. So I understand the difference between being nice and being effective. They're not the same thing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Prager. I'm sorry we don't have time for your question at this point, but we are going to go into our next panel. So a round of applause for...
Okay, see you later. See you soon. Thank you,
Ms.
thank
Prager.
you.
Thank
See
you so
soon.
much. We'll see you back here in a few.